Good morning. Today I'm going to talk to you about 3 lessons that I have learned in my life that have stood me in good stead and helped to make me the success that I am today. Look at me now, you might sort of say, that doesn't account for very much. And success can be defined in many different ways. I'm talking here about success mentally and also success financially. Yeah. The first lesson started when I was 15, and I got in touch with my father, who I hadn't seen for about 8 years, something like that, and because I needed some advice. I wanted to leave school and wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I had arranged for myself an apprenticeship because I was not very good at school and academically pretty useless. Physically quite good in sports and things, but academically hopeless. So I arranged to meet my father, and after 8 years I sort of was expecting something a little bit different than what happened, but we met in his car. He just picked me up. He said to me, "I'll pick you up at a certain bus stop," and he did, and we just sat in his car and chatted. I thought that we might have at least gone and had a milkshake or something together, but no, we didn't. And I told him, I want to leave school. And he said, "That's great. What do you want to do?" And I said to him, "I've arranged myself an apprenticeship as a cabinet maker's machinist." Now, a cabinet maker is somebody who makes furniture. A cabinet maker's machinist is a person who picks out the timber that's going to go into the furniture and cuts it into the pieces that the cabinet maker uses to make his furniture. So, pretty mundane sort of an occupation. And I knew that I didn't want to do it, but I had started work there. And I'd only been working for a couple of weeks. I was living with my grandmother at the time. And my father said to me, "Well, that's a great occupation if that's what you want to do for the rest of your life," which is exactly what I knew I did not want to do for the rest of my life. But he said, if you want to be successful, you need to get an education. He said, but there's 2 types of education. He said the first type of education is if you go to school, get an education through the tertiary system, get a degree, and if you do that, you'll probably wind up having everything in life that most people want. You'll be able to buy a house, you'll probably get married, have a few kids, have a car, etc. And this is what most people aspire to in their life. But I knew that that's exactly what I did not want to do. I was living in New Zealand at the time where I was brought up, which was the arse end of the world, in my opinion, or at least it was in those days. In the 1960s, when the world was changing dramatically, people were walking on the moon, Elvis and the Beatles were shaking things up, Woodstock was happening, all sorts of wonderful things were happening around the world, and I just wanted to be a part of it. Dad said I needed to get an education, a tertiary education, and go to school and settle down with a nice wife and a nice house. No, thank you very much. So I said to him, "What is the other type of education?" And he said, "The other type of education is an education of life." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "An education of life is learning how to understand people, how to understand how they think, what drives them, what motivates them. And if you do that, if you learn how to understand people, then you can use them in whichever way you want to become successful for yourself." He said most extremely successful people do not have a college degree. They do not know everything that they need to know to get where they are, but they have the ability to be able to use the people who have the knowledge to create their own success. So I said, "Well, how do you get an education of life?" And he said, "Well, the best way that I know is to travel." And at 15, with no money, how do you travel? And he said, the best way is to join the Navy. Well, I thought, okay, that sounds sensible to me. So my grandmother took me down to the Navy recruiting office. Yes, sir, no, sir, 3 bags full, sir. And they said, yep, we'd love to have you. You're just the sort of guy that we want. But we've just had an intake and we're not having another one for another 6 months, which got me pretty dejected. I didn't want to wait 6 months. So my grandmother advised me, well, why don't we go around to the shipping companies and find out if you can get a ship on one of the cargo ships. So we did that. We went to 2 or 3 companies and they all said the same thing. They said, you need to join the union before we can give you a job. There's plenty of jobs going, but we need to give you you need to join the union first. So we went down to the union office in Auckland. It was right down by the wharves. We went in there and I said to the guy, I'd like to join the union. I want to go to sea. And he said, sure. And he gave me this form to fill out. I filled it all out, gave it back to him and said, how long do you think it will take before I get a ship? And he said, oh, about 3 years. Wow. Do you think that didn't deject me? I was pretty miserable when we walked out of there. And I said to my grandmother, what will we do? What should I do? And she said, well, why don't you phone them next Friday and see if there's a job available? This was a Friday. We'd gone to see them. She said, give it a week and then give them a call. And I thought to myself, yeah, that makes sense. If I call them, maybe they'll have something that come available. If I just happen to be Johnny on the spot, I might get something. But I went one step further. I called them on Monday. Then I called them again on Wednesday. Then I called them again on Friday. And they said, yep, come in, we've got a ship for you. And I said, wow, wonderful. So I went in there, joined the union, paid my dues, etc. And I asked them when we were leaving, why did you give me a job after 1 week when you told me it would take 3 years? He said, because you kept phoning in. And he said, if you want it that much, then you're the sort of person that we want. Right? Big lesson there, how persistence pays off and that people want you if you want them. So that was fun. I joined the Merchant Marine. My first boat was travelling up around the Pacific. We went up to Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, the Cook Islands. Did several trips up there. And to reinforce the lessons on persistence, one of my roommates was a chap called Ray Lusty. Tall, angular, Nordic sort of a guy. Had a very small, mean sort of a mouth, but he was actually a lovely guy, and he used to get by smiling a lot. And we were walking up Queen Street in Auckland one time, and we were talking about girls. Now, I was only 15 at this time. Girls were pretty novel to me, having girlfriends at this stage. And he said, finding yourself a girlfriend or picking up girls is just a numbers game. He said, you go up to 10 girls and ask them if they'll sleep with you, was what he put. Ask them if they'll go to bed with you. He said, you'll get 9 slaps in the face, but one of them will eventually say yes. And you never know whether the one who says yes is going to be the first one or the 10th one. And he said, look, I'll show you. And there was this girl walking towards us. Average sort of a looking girl, nothing very special. But he walked up to her and he said, excuse me. He said, look, you look as though you're on your own and doing nothing. He said, we're just on a ship in harbour here. We said, we don't know anybody in the town. And I was just wondering if you'd like to come and have a coffee with us and a chat and tell us about the city. Well, to cut a long story short, she did, and he wound up in bed with her that night. Okay. So, obviously it doesn't always work that way, but the point of the story is getting what you want is very often a numbers game. Later on in life, when I went into sales, they defined it this way. They said you can either use the rifle approach to prospecting or the scattergun approach? He said the rifle approach is that you point it at one person and you work on that person until you get what you want. The scattergun approach or the shotgun approach means that you fire pellets at everybody, and sooner or later one of them will hit somebody and you'll get a response. Right? Some years later, when I was about 22, and I travelled around the world. I've been around the world several times, spent time through the Baltic and the Mediterranean, through Canada, all around the Middle East, all around, well, I shouldn't say all around, but parts of America and South America. Been through the Panama, went through the Suez, spent some time in Africa, and I figured life was really good. Life was really good working on the ships. You didn't have to think about anything. Your washing was done for you, your meals were cooked for you. If you wanted money when you got into port, you just got an advance on your pay, which they kept until you signed off the ship, and then they gave you the balance. Life was really easy. And I thought, if I don't get out now, I'm going to start to like this too much, and I'm going to be here for the rest of my life. So I decided to get out. The ship I was on was running between South America and Australia and New Zealand at the time, and there was a really bad crew on board. Really bad crew. They fighting all the time, arguing all the time, and we got to Auckland, and I went to saw my grandmother, and she said, well, if you want to pay off, I'll go to the doctors and get a medical certificate to say that I'm really ill and I need you to come and look after me. So that's what she did, and the captain paid me off the ship on compassionate grounds. But that left me with a problem. What am I going to do with myself now? Here I am, 22 at the time. I've been at sea for about 6.5 years. Didn't know anything. Had no knowledge about anything, or thought I didn't. But what I did have was some sort of knowledge of people, of living in close quarters of people and getting on with them in all sorts of circumstances, good and bad. And so my grandmother at this time had a general store in a place called Tairua up the Coromandel Peninsula. Beautiful little spot. It was the only shop up there. So everybody on the peninsula used to come and shop there. And she said they were getting quite old, Nana and Arthur, and they said, would you like to buy into the shop with us? They said, we don't really need you here most of the year, but we need you here for 6 weeks over Christmas, for Easter, and for a few long weekends when all the tourists come in. He said, but if you buy into half of the shop, you can take half the profits. We'll run the shop for the rest of the year, and you can do what you want. You can travel, you can get another job, you can do whatever you like. They had some wonderful golf courses up there then. I loved playing golf. But really what I was condemning myself to was exactly what I didn't want to do. Exactly for the same reason that I'd gone to talk to my father in the first place. I could see life in front of me settling into this hiatus of doing nothing, finding a woman, getting married and having babies, and exactly what I didn't want to do. My father had moved to Australia at this time. He was living in Sydney and he'd gone into real estate, and he had a partner here in Sydney called Frank Critchlow, and they had several real estate offices. So my father said to my grandmother, his mother, send him over to Australia and he can go into real estate with me. And my grandmother said, what on earth is going into real estate going to teach him? And my father said another very poignant thing. He said, it is going to teach him how to deal with large amounts of money. And my grandmother said, what difference is that going to make? And he said, when you start to become successful, being comfortable in dealing with large amounts of money is what life is all about. So he said, if you can learn to deal with large amounts of money when it's other people's, then when it becomes your own money, is not so difficult, because it's only just a matter of changing the ownership, not changing the figures. He said, when you're comfortable with it, you will then you will then have the chance to become successful. Very, very poignant lesson in life. So I did. I went to Sydney and went into real estate with him. It took me, I think, about 4 or 5 months before I made my first sale. And by this time, I think Frank was getting a bit antsy about paying me every week and not doing anything. But they had another old chap in the office there, and I cannot remember his name. But he'd been in real estate all his life. Smoked like a chimney. Stunk of cigarette smoke. But he used to sell a lot of properties. When I sold my first property, which was a tiny little terrace house in Arncliffe for $17,000. That was back in probably 1971, 72, something like that, early 70s anyway. It opened the floodgates, and I started to sell quite comfortably until it got to the stage where I was actually selling more than the old guy in the office, which really upset him. That really has nothing to do with the story. That's probably me being a bit boastful. But the lessons that my father and my grandmother taught me about persistence, about learning how to deal with people, about being able to talk to people at any level, no matter how far above you or below you they seem to be, was a very marked lesson. My father also gave me a book to read, Somerset Maugham, a set of books, a set of Somerset Maugham short stories. And I read, which got me reading a lot. I used to read a lot on the ship anyway. And it led me to a story called, or a poem called If. And If is a story written by a father to his son. And basically it says that if you can learn to deal with people on any stage of life, no matter whether they be kings or queens or paupers and beggars, if you can deal with them equally, and if you can make a success of your life and lose everything and not give a damn and pick yourself up and start again, which is a very stoic type of philosophy, then you'll be a happy man. And as life has turned out, and I'm living here now amongst my harem of nieces and daughters, I must submit that I am a happy man. Life's been very good to me, largely because of those 3 pieces of advice that led me to do what I have done in life. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something from that.